Welcome to Room 101 at Harrigan Compound West. It's story time. So this week I'm trying out some Cornell and Diehl Oriental silk, and the packaging on this one tells us that it combines Perique, bright flake, whatever the hell that is, Turkish flake, and bright Virginia ribbons to create a remarkably elegant and sophisticated smoke. Well, I don't know if it's sophisticated. That doesn't seem like a word I would use to describe pipe tobacco, but we'll see how it goes. It's unremarkable upon first light, and for the first third or so of the bowl. We'll see if something better happens along the way here. And as we wait for that, we can talk about this strange thing that happened to me in the summer of 1985, not to give away how ancient I actually am, but there you go. A couple of friends of mine and this is going to sound unlike me, and it is unlike me. We were driving to go play tennis. I don't know what to say about that either. But anyway, as we drove to go play tennis, we ended up hearing on the radio that in 15 minutes, a tremendous concert announcement would be forthcoming. So we immediately decided not to go play tennis. We instead drove to this wretched place, which exists no longer, called the Naugatuck Valley Mall. And in the Sears at the Naugatuck Valley Mall, or was it G Fox? I can never keep it straight. There was a ticket agency. It was called Ticketron back then. We didn't like it anymore. We like Ticketmaster now. Wouldn't be surprised if it was the same company over time. Anyway, we sat in the parking lot outside of the store that held the Ticketron inside, and we waited for this concert announcement to be made. And we were kicking around who we thought it might be, and the only thing we could come up with was a reformed Led Zeppelin. And it turns out we weren't too terribly far off from that, because it was Live Aid, a place where we finally did get to see a reformed Led Zeppelin. But we'll get to that in a minute. So they announced that there would be this show called Live Aid, and it was an extension of the Band-Aid Christmas song, Do They Know It's Christmas? And there was some other American variant, which is so unremarkable I can't remember it at this point. Anyway, when they started announcing it, it was to be held at RFK Stadium down in Philadelphia, drivable for us from Waterbury, Connecticut. It started really shaping up to sound quite fantastic. So we all dug into our wallets and found some money, because back then we didn't have credit cards or debit cards. You needed actual coin. And we had enough, actually, to each of us buy 2 tickets, which was the limit. So the 3 of us bought 6 tickets, and we figured what we would do is sell 3 of them to help offset the cost, which we ended up doing. And by selling the 3 tickets that we didn't need, we were able to pay for the gas to get back and forth, because when you're 18 years old, gas is very expensive. And the hotel room that we would need, and indeed the cost of our tickets. So we just all got in the car. Friday, it was the middle of June in 1985. So it was, I think, Saturday, June 13th, if memory serves. And we got in the car Friday, and we just drove to Philadelphia. And we stayed in this terrible, terrible hotel, something that I would only stay in now if, I don't know, American Airlines stranded me in some foreign city, and I had no choice but to stay in the worst hotel in town. Anyway, we brought coolers full of ice and beer, and we thought this was just the greatest thing ever. And had a really nice time the night before, and forgot really to sleep a little bit, because the concert was going to start at, I think, 9 a.m., some ungodly hour. And we got there on time, believe it or not. It's probably the last time I woke up at that hour without complaining. And we streamed in, and we had no idea how hot the day was going to be. But it was pretty warm when we showed up. And it actually got so hot that people were passing out left and right. And let's just say the logistics weren't up to snuff. I don't think anybody really thought about these sorts of things back then. And at some point during the day, in the height of the afternoon sun, it was probably over 100 degrees, and we're all crammed into RFK Stadium. Somebody opened up a fire hose on the crowd, and people are actually fighting each other to get to where the fire hose was unloosing upon the concert goers. I couldn't make it there, unfortunately. It was always pointed the other way. So a bunch of us ended up getting very, very small plastic cups. And we would go into the bathroom and fill them up and drink as many of them down as we could hope, and then pour them over our heads and go back out where we were watching the show. And the show was actually quite good, but it began inauspiciously. And I don't say this because I can't stand Billy Ocean, although I can't stand Billy Ocean. I think the Hooters opened the show, but Billy Ocean was the first person anybody had ever heard of. And he had a couple of big songs, Loverboy being one of them. And he came out and sang along, not to a backing track, but to the entire track. You could actually hear the guitar as such that it was, the keyboards, the bass, the drums, all playing along as Billy sang. And you could, if you paid close attention, hear two Billys singing along. This became embarrassing later when a song faded out and Billy just kept right on going. All right, so it wasn't the greatest beginning to much of anything, but it heated up pretty quick. And there were a couple of real highlights for me. We got to see Black Sabbath with Ozzy. That hadn't happened for quite some time. He had left, I think, in the very early 80s, so 5 or so years before. And it was nice to see them, although the performance wasn't that good. But what the hell, it was Live Aid, right? And Judas Priest, another big favorite. If you're sensing that I'm a metal fan, you're exactly correct. And Priest was really good, except for the massive feedback that they got almost every minute they were on the stage. Still, it was Judas Priest. It's the only time I ever had to see Judas Priest at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, whatever that means. And then, there were some stranger highlights, things that I didn't expect to love, but did. Tom Petty, probably the chief of these. He was just outstanding. It was unbelievable how good Tom Petty was. He just commanded the entire stage. The sound was great. Where other bands were having a lot of trouble sounding good, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers came on and they just lit it up. And I've been a big fan of his ever since, actually. And we got to see some stranger things like Ashford and Simpson, things I never thought I would see. Tina Turner came out and it was pretty impressive. Mick Jagger joins her. Neil Young comes out, and it's Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. Wow, right? Who would have thought? And it's strange, but all these years later, I don't remember it as a continuous event. I remember it as a bunch of snapshots, which is probably how you're doomed to remember things that happened 30 years ago. But the snapshots are incredibly detailed. And they kind of start with the thing that happened at the end of the show when I got to see Zeppelin. And I'll tell you, sadly, that it was probably the worst Led Zeppelin performance there ever was. And I'm sure they had some real clunkers back in the heyday of their drug days. We'll just put it like that, I guess. But Live Aid was not their moment. Phil Collins played drums and Tony Tucker played drums. So 2 drummers on stage, filling in for John Bonham. And Phil Collins, not getting it. It was, they should have left him off the ticket. But he had, of course, played Live Aid in England and then took the Concorde over to the States and played Live Aid there. I believe he was the only guy to play both shows. And as bad as Zeppelin was, and they were bad, I mean, Plant's voice was hoarse. Page's guitar was woefully out of tune. We drank it in like the gift that it was, right? That we got to see Led Zeppelin. I'm probably the only person from my generation who could say that. I don't know anybody who saw them at the O2 show. So there it is, right? It was Zeppelin. And they only played 3 songs, which was probably merciful. And we all thought it was crazy that they would only play 3 songs. And I believe Patti Labelle was next up. And she was roundly booed for most of her performance. And people started chanting Zeppelin. And Patti went on and on and on and on and probably played 3 times as long as anybody else at Live Aid. Not quite sure why that was. Wasn't happy that it happened. Of course, by then it was a little better because it had gotten dark. And when it got dark, it got cooler. And there was a boisterousness that flowed through the crowd at that point that wasn't there in the afternoon, right, when it was Madonna playing. And she was quite horrible. So I've been to a Madonna show. Kind of. And as I look back on it, it was easily one of the greatest one-day events of the young Harrigan life. It was just great. And we just had a killer of a time. And because we were so broke, we couldn't, of course, had chipped in for that hotel the second night. I think the hotel probably cost us $15, $20, something like this. And there was no way we could afford that 2 nights in a row. So we all piled into the car we had come in and drove home. And then, as if to punish us for having such a good time, the alternator in the car gave up the ghost right on the Tappan Zee Bridge. And we all had to get out and push the car over the second half of the Tappan Zee Bridge to get it back onto terra firma, where we would abandon it for later removal. So the ride home wasn't that great, but the day surely was. Non-stop music, 16 hours, something like this. Something I'll never forget. And every couple of years, I tee up all of the videos from Live Aid, and I watch them again to relive the day a little bit. And every time I do that, I notice that the Led Zeppelin performance is not out on the official DVDs of the event, because even they knew they sucked really bad, and they refused to allow that nonsense to get out past the gatekeepers and into the record buying public. Anyway, you can find that on YouTube if you really want to, and you probably do just one time. It's not unlike looking at a car accident. You can't peel your eyes away, even though you know it's horrific. Anyway, back to Oriental Silk. And I have to say, it's really no better at the end than it was at the beginning. I had high hopes for this. It doesn't deliver at all. Not surprising, I guess I should say, because I don't really love any of the Cornell and Diehl blends, with the one exception of Pirate Cake, which I think is so good that I don't understand how they made it. This one, not so great. Bland, one-dimensional, flat. These are the kinds of words I would use to describe it. Not really that much of a surprise, I guess, but I was hoping for better.
H-A-R-R-I-G-A-N spells Harrigan, proud of all the Irish blood that's in me.
So, as most of you know, I'm a very big fan of Marillion, the one true band, as they are in my mind. And they were asked to play Live Aid over in London at Wembley, and they said no. Kind of a confounding career choice there. Luckily for the music-loving world, Queen was all ready for the day, and we watched it on a closed circuit on the screen, and Queen got a better reception on a closed circuit screen in the United States than probably 2/3 of the band who played Live Aid did. It was one of those transcendent performances. It was unbelievable. And look, we all know that Queen is a very good band and a great live act, and yet they managed to take it to a completely different level for Live Aid at Wembley. And I watched that performance probably more than all of the others combined, because I think it's one of those great nights that a great band has. It's probably definitive of who they were and what they could do. Just amazing. If you haven't watched it, go put some headphones on and give it a look. Freddie Mercury, easily the most powerful frontman of that day. He had all those people at Wembley in the palm of his hands. Astonishing. Not a joke, I guess. But what the hell. See you next week.